Ever gotten halfway through your morning coffee routine?
And realized you're out of filters.
The worst. But, it actually perfectly illustrates the point of our deep dive today, procurement risk.
It's not glamorous, but it's the backbone of, well, everything.
Exactly. And when it goes wrong, those little inconveniences, like a missed coffee, can snowball into major disruptions.
We're talking production delays, missed deadlines, financial hits, the whole 9 yards.
And that's why we're digging into this GlobeLink Sourcing article. It breaks down the often invisible world of procurement risk in a way that's honestly pretty eye-opening.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just think back to the chaos of the pandemic.
Empty shelves, shipping nightmares, the great hand sanitizer shortage of 2020.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a blip, right? Those disruptions had ripple effects that impacted pretty much every industry imaginable.
It showed just how interconnected and, let's be honest, fragile global supply chains really are.
And the thing is, those headline-grabbing events are just the tip of the iceberg.
There's a whole undercurrent of potential risks that companies need to be aware of, right?
Absolutely. And the GlobeLink article does a great job of categorizing those risks, which is incredibly useful when you're trying to, actually manage them.
So let's jump into their framework, shall we? First up, we have supply chain chaos.
The fun one.
Well, we've already touched on pandemics, but the article goes deeper. Natural disasters, political instability, even something as simple as a traffic jam on a key shipping route.
And it's not just about those sudden catastrophic events either. Sometimes it's the slower, more insidious disruptions that can really catch you off guard, like what happens if the price of a key raw material suddenly skyrockets?
Or if a critical supplier in a politically unstable region suddenly goes dark.
Yeah, those scenarios can have massive ripple effects.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of supply chain chaos, the human element.
Because behind every contract and shipping manifest, there are people making decisions, right?
Exactly. And those decisions, well, they're not always perfect. Maybe your supplier is going through internal restructuring, or there's a sudden change in leadership.
Or maybe they just, drop the ball.
It happens. And suddenly you're left scrambling to make up for their oversight.
Which is why due diligence is so important.
Absolutely. Vetting your suppliers, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, it's all part of mitigating that supply chain chaos. But you know what? Even with the most rigorous due diligence, things can still go wrong.
Because sometimes it's not just bad luck or human error, it's, well, let's just say some suppliers are a little more creative in their approach to risk.
Ah, yes. Which brings us to our next category. And I have to say, the GlobeLink folks nailed it with this name. Supplier shenanigans.
Ooh, supplier shenanigans. Sounds like we're about to dive into a corporate thriller here. Are we talking industrial espionage? Sabotage?
Well, I wouldn't say it's always that dramatic, but let's just say there's a whole spectrum of supplier shenanigans that can keep a procurement professional up at night.
Okay, so spill the tea. What kind of mischief are we talking about here?
Well, sometimes it's not even intentional mischief. Sometimes it's complacency.
Complacency, huh?
Yeah, like a supplier who's been resting on their laurels for a bit too long.
Their quality control slips, or they overpromise and underdeliver.
Exactly. Or maybe there's a sudden change in their leadership and priorities shift.
And those long-standing relationships you thought you could bank on, well, they might not be so reliable anymore.
And that's why, even without any malicious intent, relying too heavily on one supplier is a recipe for disaster.
Right. Like we talked about earlier, putting all your eggs in one basket, never a good idea.
The GlobeLink article actually uses a term for this concentration risk. It's a huge one.
Makes total sense. Okay, so we've got supply chain chaos, we've got supplier shenanigans. What other landmines are lurking out there in the world of procurement?
Well, this next one might not sound as exciting as corporate espionage, but it can be just as costly. Compliance conundrums.
Compliance. Ugh. Yeah, that's a big one.
It's the kind of risk that can really sneak up on you. One minute you're signing a seemingly straightforward contract, the next minute you're facing hefty fines, legal battles, even reputational damage.
Because you accidentally sourced materials from a conflict zone, or your supplier wasn't adhering to labor laws,
or any number of things. The regulatory landscape is constantly evolving, and it only takes one misstep to land in hot water.
It's a minefield out there.
Yeah.
So how do companies even begin to navigate these compliance conundrums? It feels like you need a law degree just to source a shipment of paper clips these days.
Well, it's definitely not easy. But the good news is there are tools and strategies that can help companies manage these risks more effectively. And that's what we'll dig into after the break.
So before the break, we were teetering on the edge of compliance chaos. It sounds like a recipe for sleepless nights for any procurement professional.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. But as with all the risks we've talked about today, the key is proactive management. You can't just bury your head in the sand and hope for the best.
Right. Ignorance is not bliss when it comes to things like labor laws and environmental regulations.
Not at all. But thankfully, there are ways to tackle these challenges head on.
Okay, so give us the good stuff. What are some practical steps companies can take to navigate this compliance minefield?
Well, it all starts with due diligence. And I know we touched on this earlier, but it's worth reiterating because it's that important.
Right, so not just Googling a supplier 5 minutes before you sign a contract.
Exactly. You need to really dig deep, understand their values, their track record, make sure they're aligned with your company's ethical and legal standards.
It's almost like you're bringing them into your inner circle, right?
In a way, yeah, you're trusting them to uphold your company's reputation, so you need to be darn sure they're worthy of that trust.
And that trust goes both ways, right?
Wow.
They need to be able to trust you're holding up your end of the bargain, too.
100%. Open communication, transparency, clear expectations. Those are the foundations of a healthy and compliant supplier relationship.
It's like any good relationship, really. Built on communication and, dare I say, a little bit of mutual respect.
Exactly. And speaking of healthy relationships, the GlobeLink article touches on another important aspect of mitigating compliance risk: regular supplier audits.
Okay, audits. That makes sense. But how does that work in practice? Are we talking surprise inspections, teams of lawyers descending on a factory floor?
It's not quite as dramatic as all that. Think of it more like a checkup with your doctor, Regular assessments to make sure everything is running smoothly, identify any potential red flags, and address them proactively.
So like a collaborative effort rather than an adversarial one.
Precisely. Because at the end of the day, both you and your suppliers want the same thing: a successful and sustainable business relationship. And that's only possible when everyone's on the same page and committed to doing things the right way.
Right. Compliance isn't just about avoiding fines and lawsuits. It's about building a more ethical and responsible supply chain, which is good for everyone.
Exactly. It's about doing business the right way for the right reasons. And that leads us to one final point I want to emphasize, and it ties into everything we discussed today.
Lay it on us.
Technology. Don't underestimate the power of technology in mitigating procurement risk.
Okay, I was wondering when you were going to bring this up because honestly, with all the data and analytics available today, it feels like companies should have a much clearer picture of their risk landscape, right?
Absolutely. And the technology is only getting better. We're talking AI-powered risk prediction, real-time supply chain visibility, automated compliance monitoring. It's pretty incredible stuff.
It's like having a crystal ball for your procurement department.
Yeah,
You can spot those risks before they even become risks.
that's the goal. And as that technology continues to evolve, I think we're going to see a real shift in how companies approach procurement risk.
Exciting times. But, even with the most sophisticated technology, it all comes back to the human element, doesn't it?
Always. Technology is a tool, but it's the people wielding those tools who ultimately make the difference.
Couldn't agree more. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. From rogue container ships to the power of AI, it's clear that procurement risk is a multifaceted and ever-evolving beast,
It definitely keeps things interesting.
to say the least.
Yeah.
But the good news is, with the right knowledge, the right tools, and a healthy dose of proactive planning, companies can navigate those risks and build more resilient and responsible supply chains.
Absolutely. It's all about being proactive, being informed, and never underestimating the importance of strong, ethical supplier relationships.
Well said. A huge thank you to our expert for joining us today and sharing your insights. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.